to make some biscuits for breakfast. Now, before I get into showing you how I make these, I just wanted to talk about biscuits for a minute. Now, how I'm going to show you today is how my grandmother taught me how to make biscuits. But one thing that I have learned is that everybody does biscuits differently. Some people use lard, some people use shortening, some people use butter, some people use buttermilk or milk or heavy cream. Some people put sugar in their biscuits. How you make biscuits is completely and totally up to you. It's your cooking in your kitchen, so you do what you and your family like. For me, I'm just going to show you today, again, how my grandmother taught me. But again, make them your own. If you want to add some sugar, add some sugar. If you want to use a different, form of liquid like cream or buttermilk, do that. Make them your own. Now, my grandmother, I don't remember her measuring when she made biscuits. She made them so often she could just eyeball it. I don't make them nearly as often, so I am going to be measuring. I'm going to be doing a half of a recipe today, but I will put in the description box below the full recipe. Now, these are super easy to make. They are only, as you can see, I've got 3 ingredients out on the counter. That's really all that you need. They take just a few minutes to put together. Now, obviously, it'll take a little bit longer for this video because I'll be talking through it, but just to do it from start to finish, it doesn't even take 5 minutes to put together. Now, there's nothing in the world wrong with biscuits from a tube or frozen biscuits. There are some really good options available in the grocery stores, but nothing beats a good homemade biscuit. So today, we are going to be using lard. Now, this is what my grandmother used. Several months ago, I actually did I called it a biscuit trial, where I made a batch of biscuits, but I used the 3 different fats. I used butter in one batch, I used shortening in another batch, and I used lard in another batch. And my husband and I tried them to figure out which we liked best. Our preference was shortening. We liked the shortening just a little bit better than the lard. Lard was our next favorite, and then the butter was actually last, which kind of surprised me. I thought we would like the butter the best, but we didn't. The shortening just made a really tender, flaky biscuit. It was really delicious. But again, you do whatever you like. So we've got our lard. I've got some buttermilk. If you don't have buttermilk, you can just use milk, a little splash of vinegar, and let it sit for a few minutes. And then I'm going to be using self-rising flour. Now, a lot of people here in the South swear by white lily. That just happens to be what I have today. I don't remember my grandmother, fiercely sticking to white lily. From what I remember, she just used, whatever self-rising flour she had. So you just use whatever you have. If you don't have self-rising, if you have all-purpose flour, you can totally use that. You just want to add a little bit of salt and a little bit of leavener. You can just Google substitute all-purpose flour for self-rising, and it'll give you the appropriate measurements. So I've got my oven preheating to 450 degrees. You want to cook your biscuits hot and fast. That way they rise. And then I've got a cast iron skillet. That is the traditional Southern way to make them. But if you don't have a cast iron skillet, no worries. Use a cooking sheet. You can use a cake pan, whatever you have. That's the thing about, I think, Southern cooking more than anything is with Southern cooking, you just use what you have. That's, what my grandparents and my great-grandparents did. Okay, so to make these biscuits, I'm going to take my flour. Now, again, I'm halving this recipe, which depending on how thick I make my biscuits, it normally makes 4 or 5, but I'll put the full recipe down below. So I've got my sifter. So I'm going to do a cup of flour. If you don't have a sifter, you can just use a whisk. That works too. I'm just going to sift my flour. This just gets the lumps out of your flour. And see, that's why you sift. Okay. Next, you're going to take your whatever fat you're using. If you use shortening or lard, you can just leave it room temperature. If you're using butter though, you want to make sure your butter is super, super cold. So you want to take butter directly out of the refrigerator, cut it into little tiny cubes. I like to stick it in the freezer for a little bit just so that they get really nice and cold. Because with butter, you want your butter to be really, really cold. That way when you put your biscuits in the oven, the heat makes the butter steam, and that's what creates your rise in your biscuits. But again, if you're using lard or shortening, you don't have to worry about that. You just use it room temperature. So with my cup of flour, I'm going to put in 2 tablespoons of lard. Okay. And then if you have a pastry cutter, you can use a pastry cutter. I do not, so I'm just going to use my handy dandy fork. And basically, you're just going to cut the shortening, or the lard in this case, into your flour. So I like to do that just by like taking the lard and like pushing it against the side of the bowl. You can use 2 forks, you can use a pastry cutter. And I mean, always whenever you're cooking, you always want to wash your hands the very first thing. But with these biscuits, you especially want to make sure you have clean hands, because you are going to put your hands in this. And there's no way to make biscuits without using your hands. Okay. So again, I'm just taking my fork and mashing the shortening into the sides of the bowl and the bottom of the bowl. And you just want to do that until your shortening is like the size of peas. So it's really fine. We're almost there. Okay, that looks good to me. And you know, you can see there's chunks of shortening in there, and that's good. Or lard. I keep saying shortening, I'm sorry. There's chunks of lard in there, and that's good. That's what you want. That's going to create those air pockets of steam. You don't want it to be completely incorporated into it. Okay. So I'm going to call that good. Next, I'm going to take my buttermilk. Now, I've got just over 1/2 cup measured here. I'm going to start out by adding 1/2 of it. If you add too much liquid, you can always add more flour. But I find that when I do that, then you kind of get into the never-ending battle of add more flour, add more milk, add more flour, add more milk. So, you know, add less milk than what you think you'll need. You can always go back and add more if you need it. So I'm going to stir this together. And what you're looking for is basically for your flour to disappear. You don't want to see raw flour. Please excuse my timer. I've got some bacon in the oven. Okay. Now, as much as I said don't do this, I added just a little bit too much liquid, so I'm going to add just a little bit of flour. Okay, and see how it's like forming a ball on its own, and you don't have any extra flour in the bottom that's dry. Okay, so I had to take my bacon out of the oven. That's out. So now let's pat out and cut out our biscuits, and then we'll put them in the oven and we will be done. So I cleared my counter. I'm going to set my dough to the side. And you want to make sure, again, you're working on a clean counter. And you want to take some flour. And you just want to make sure that your board is pretty well floured. And then you want to turn out your dough. I'm going to put just a little bit of flour on my hands. Now, some people knead, some people don't knead. I feel like I like to knead just a couple of times, maybe like 8 or so times, just to work in some of the flour. But you definitely do not want to overwork your dough. You will have biscuits that are hard as a rock. And especially if you're using butter in your biscuits, you want to handle it as gently and as little as possible, because you don't want that butter to get warm and start melting. So again, I'm just kind of gently kneading my dough. That's all I'm going to work it. And if the dough starts to stick at all, just kind of lift it up and just put you a little bit of flour under there. Now, some people roll out their biscuits with a rolling pin. I don't like to do that. Again, I try to work it as little as possible. All I do is I just pat it out. Just kind of form it into a circle. And then I just pat them out. And I pat them out. You can make them as thin, as thick as you like. I usually make them about as thick as my thumb is. And then I'm going to take my biscuit cutter and dip it in my flour. If you don't have a biscuit cutter, this is like a 2.5 inch. If you don't have a biscuit cutter, you can use a cup, you can use a coffee glass, you can use whatever you have, a mason jar, a jar lid, whatever you have. So I just went straight up and down, and there you go, there's the biscuit. And look, you can already start to see the different layers in your biscuit. So I got 3. So I'm going to take my dough back together. Again, I'm going to pat them out. So it's about the size of the width of my thumb. Take my straight up and down. Straight up and down. And I've got this little bit of dough left. You have a little Yorkie Shih Tzu mix, and so I like to, when I have a little bit of dough like this left over, I'll make just a little bitty tiny biscuit for him as a little treat. Okay, so let me wash my hands. Okay, so we've got our biscuits cut out. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of the lard that I used for the biscuits. I'm going to take my cast iron pan, again, use whatever pan you've got, and I'm just going to grease the pan. I'm going to go up on the sides a little bit, just so the biscuits don't stick. Okay, I'm going to take my biscuits, I'm going to put them in my pan. I'm going to put them to where they're touching each other. That helps them rise. Put Happy's little biscuit in there. Okay, there are biscuits. So we're going to pop them in a 450-degree oven. I'm going to check them after 10 minutes, and I will show you when they're done. All right, so it's been about 15 minutes, and I just took the biscuits out of the oven. You can cook them as brown or as blonde as you would like them. But I'm gonna take a little bit of melted butter. I'm just gonna brush the tops with a little bit of butter. All right. And then I'm going to fry up some eggs, let these cool for a few minutes, and I'll be back to show you what they look like. Okay, so our biscuits have cooled for a few minutes. I have finished up our breakfast and made our plates, but I just want to show you these biscuits. They're super hot, by the way, and I'm probably going to burn my hands, but I just want to show you, like, can you see how fluffy and like all the layers? Let me show you this one. Like, look at all those layers. Look how soft and fluffy that is. And then when you open it, I mean, come on. This is so hot. I mean, just look at that. Okay, these are going to be delicious. All right, let me show you our plates. All right, and here are our plates. I've seen several people post pictures of sausage gravy lately, and so I've been craving it, so I just made myself some white gravy, and I added some butterball turkey sausage crumbles in it. Not because I'm trying to be healthy. I mean, let's be real, we're eating biscuits and gravy, but that's just what I happen to have on hand. So I made that, and then my husband requested some bacon, egg, and cheese biscuits, so I just fried up a couple of eggs, put some bacon in the oven, and that is breakfast. If you like these types of videos, please hit the thumbs up button below and subscribe to my channel. And again, thank you so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.